Thanks, Meredith. Hi, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. My name is Caitlin Harbeck. I'm an Associate Program Manager for Cryospheric Sciences at NASA headquarters, and also the co-lead for the IARPC Glaciers and Sea Level Community of Practice, along with Zoe Corville, who could not be here with us today. So over the past year, I guess, there have been two pretty important community meetings surrounding Greenland Ice Sheet processes, future of Greenland Ice Sheet science, Greenland Ice Sheet Stability. So we're lucky to have two of the folks who have been instrumental in planning those meetings here with us today to sort of give us an update of what was discussed at those meetings and paths forward. So we're going to start by hearing from Joe MacGregor, a former co-lead of the IARPC Glaciers and Sea Level Community of Practice. Joe is a glaciologist at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, and he's going to be filling us in on the future of Greenland Ice Sheet Science Workshop and their recent white paper that was just distributed yesterday, I believe, to that community. So Joe, I don't know if you've got slides or if you want to share your screen and take it away.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin, for the introduction. Thank you, Meredith, for getting us set up and introducing as well. And so, yeah, I'm Joe MacGregor, and many of you have seen my face before in these meetings, and I am going to share my slides. Did that work?
Yep, yeah, just put it in slideshow mode, and then you'll be good to go.
Slideshow mode? Okay, great. Can you all see that? See that? Great.
Yep.
Wonderful. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of where the Future of Greenland Ice Sheet Science, or FOGS, workshops stand after their first two meetings. The first was all remote in 2023, or 2022, pardon me, and then the second was a hybrid meeting in 2024 that took place at Georgia Tech. And these are sponsored by NASA and NSF. And the organizing committee includes myself and four fine folk: Winnie Chu, Tim Bartholomew, who's on the meeting here too, Mathieu Morlichem, and Von Walden as well. And so I'm going to run through why we have this meeting, what it's about, and what the main conclusions are, all of which are covered in a white paper that was, as Caitlin mentioned, was released in through the FOGS mailing list yesterday. And we'll get it out to some other sources and put it up on the website soon. So why have FOGS right now? Well, the community of people studying the Greenland Ice Sheet has long had two forums for discussion thereof. And the first that many of you will be familiar with is PARCA, which stood for the Program for Arctic Regional Climate Assessment, which started in the early 90s and ran through the end of the 90s and then continued in various forms as an airborne and ground-based field program that also included this workshop component that then, after the field activities ended, just kept on going as the PARCA meeting, primarily about NASA-sponsored Greenland and Arctic research. So not just the ice sheet, but sea ice as well. And then there was GeoSummit, which was an NSF-sponsored forum that primarily focused on Summit Station and related activities, the science that's happening there, the operations at Summit, and advancing those. Now, in the particular case of PARCA, though, PARCA was often attached to fieldwork planning for Operation Icebridge and other airborne campaigns, other NASA activities. And those mostly ended in 2019. So one of the fundamental raison d'etre for PARCA had taken a bit of a pause. And along with that, there was interest in opening up what our study of the Greenland Ice Sheet would be in terms of merging these workshops, modernizing them, and producing something for the study of the Greenland Ice Sheet that's analogous to what is happening on the West Antarctic Ice Sheet side of the equation, which are the WACE workshops, which have been long running again for over 2 decades now, and have recently modernized themselves in various ways and opened themselves up to a broader community, more disciplines. And PARCA and others had made efforts in this regard, but we wanted to move that forward along too. So that's how FOGS came into being. Okay, so what is FOGS now? It's essentially our community space, our time to strategize about our mission, which is to better understand the Greenland ice sheet and its environs and how it's changing now, what's going to happen to it in the future. So what are those barriers to collectively understanding the ice sheet, and how can we remove those barriers and accelerate the pace of understanding, make use of limited resources to most improve our understanding of the ice sheet, its processes, etc. What was the format for that? Well, in both the 2022 online case and in the hybrid case this past year, we wanted to avoid what is often common in meetings in the wintertime and early spring, which are reheated AGU talks. Now, I like leftovers as much as the next person. You can often only consume as much as so much at AGU, but we weren't really getting the kind of engagement that we wanted on group discussions, on figuring out how we're going to move forward rather than reporting back on individual projects. So we really had a big emphasis on breakout groups that in 2022 and 2023 would help define the themes that our community consider important and that are going to help us move forward both in terms of the science and the culture. And further, we're entering into this world of more open science. What tools are out there? It's hard to wrap your head around all of them. Which ones are most appropriate for Greenland, and which ones do we not have that we need? We still had elements similar to some previous Parka meetings and GeoSummit meetings, in that we discussed mission updates. So programs that are bigger than just 2 or 3 PIs that have a broader community interest. We still wanted to receive updates on those. And then harkening back to that open science, we also had software tutorials, which we directly implemented in 2023 on a 3rd day, which worked out pretty well. But I really want to highlight here, and I'll see if I can do the laser thing. I can do the laser thing. Okay. The idea of identifying what the major themes of study that people are most keen on, synthesizing breakout group efforts. That's really where we wanted to capture what the state and mood of our community was. And so that's captured here in this table in these terms of these five themes on the left. These are what the organizing committee, those 5 team members, including myself, came up with from in 2022, based on the breakout groups in terms of what people consider important. So these were not pre-specified by us at all. They came about fairly organically. And then what we did in 2023 was discuss again what those were and whether they should be changed, because we really only had a half dozen people assessing them in 2022, but we wanted the whole community, over 100 people who attended these meetings, to help us advance them in 2023 and clarify them. So, for example, number 1, decolonizing U.S. research in Greenland. That's become the theme of advancing equitable and inclusive U.S. research in Greenland. Water remaining a unifying unknown across the various physical systems that we're interested in. What came out of 2023 was to attempt to quantify Greenland's water budget in a changing climate. So providing some more specificity there. In terms of open science, that stayed pretty much the same. But this 5th one, the one that is often what communities outside of those studying Greenland ice sheet expect us to contribute, projecting Greenland's contribution to sea level rise, we expanded that a little bit. Folks wanted to, obviously sea level rise is a very important component of understanding what's going to happen in the future, but we wanted to expand that in terms of societal effects. So not just what happens in terms of sea level rise globally, but what happens to Greenlandic communities locally, and what other impacts may exist in terms of freshening of the oceans locally, etc. So that's where these themes are. And the rest of my presentation is mostly going to be just going through these themes one by one on the right and clarifying what they mean. based on what we developed at the 2023 workshop. So equitable and inclusive U.S. research in Greenland. On the right, Tim put together this excellent flowchart, which in the report has URLs too, which I gather are difficult to include, that helps us assess how you might go about conducting studies of the Greenland ice sheet in the most equitable and inclusive manner possible. And this really starts with reading a document that many of us learned, including myself, learned about for the first time at the meeting. I think it was Twyla Moon who alerted us to this, which is that Greenland early in 2023 released its first national research strategy, what it hopes to get out of scientific research, not just the research that its scientists conduct, but also through its interactions with other communities. And I encourage you all to read that, because that's essentially the roadmap for everything that follows on this chart, which is, we highlight some elements here, but this is, it's a lot to digest initially, but it's not onerous, and it's very doable, and it's very much connected with where our cultural values lie within the FOGS community. And we highlight here the NSF's Navigating the New Arctic program as kind of a role model for integrating many, if not all, of these elements so far, and in terms of connecting with what communities need and following that through and releasing that in the most accessible way possible. And this is going to connect to other themes as well. Previously, we had better integrations of observations and models, and we added a bit of a twist to that, in that we also want to connect observationalists and modelers. And so the community wants to prioritize proposals, programs where those two groups are directly connected, while recognizing that currently there are not that many ice flow and ice sheet modelers in the community. So we need to find a way of growing that network as well. And can we train people who are conversant in both paradigms? You know, in the last decade, and we've heard about this at IARPIC before, we've had a resurgence of experts, of the educational programs that include glaciology, JERP, and the UIF summer school. And can we further develop these to, in some ways, keep up with what our European colleagues have access to, but for which they're oversubscribed, and we can maybe improve that. Because, I think many of us recognize that we're in a climate emergency, so we need to break our silos and connect better across those who primarily observe and those who model, to form people who can really do both. Quantifying Greenland's water budget in a changing climate, we recognize that we could diagram all, or at least all the processes we know about that affect Greenland's water budget from source to sea, but quantifying them is still quite difficult. So going from this to numbers all around is still quite a bit of a challenge. And it may be that a Greenland-specific hydrology working group is what's needed. So beyond just what FOGS can offer, to assess the state of process understanding, identify areas where we might focus, for example, super sites, and to connect disciplines, maybe some that have historically been polar with some that have not had as much of a polar emphasis in the past. Next, a topic we've talked about here in IARPIC before, in this group and in others, but is very much relevant still to FOGS too, which is open science, especially within the younger members of the community, the ones who are exceptionally conversant in the various platforms that are shown in this flowchart here. This is where they want to see our community going. We know that when data is drag and drop and it just works and makes sense, that's going to speed things up. We know that when software allows you to just immediately reproduce an entire workflow, Ken Mankoff has some examples of this, everything goes more quickly. So this was viewed as a sustained imperative all around. And then finally, projecting the Greenland ice sheet's impact on society. Universally across the group, the importance of the ISMIP projections was recognized as a fundamental output of all the various efforts that the folks in our community have made. But we think they should also have the ability in the future to consider outputs that directly aid Greenlandic communities. So, can we get to the point where we know enough about outlet glaciers that we can predict which are going to discharge more icebergs or have their termini retreat more, which might affect how those communities engage with particular fjords and fisheries, for example. During the workshop, which was pretty impressive, this cycle of model development was put together. Way to go, that breakout group. As recognizing that it's a continuous cycle of requirements, building those, and then going back to the original community to see how well they work. Because we need to do that, and Andy Ashwanden and others have illustrated this nicely in a figure for Greenland, in that these lines are all the different models that were included in ISMIP 6, and their projections with a zero line at 2015, and then going forward for total mass change for the Greenland ice sheet. And then this darker black line is the observations. And so you can see the observations are at the very high end of the model envelope in terms of mass loss from the Greenland ice sheet. So clearly we need to back around and figure out what we're missing if we're going to improve those projections going forward. Okay, so next steps. We're going to have another meeting. I'll discuss that in a little bit, but we want to be able to measure progress on our FOGS priorities. So survey our community and figure out how well we're doing in moving forward from year to year. And I'll also touch on this again in a little bit. We want to identify the next big thing or things that our community wants to accomplish that may be relevant not just to the Greenland ice sheet, but maybe other ice masses or to Greenland more generally, to advance either observations or modeling efforts or combinations thereof. And we want to ensure also the continuity of the ISMIP efforts. It was clearly recognized at the meeting that this is something that has been, I'll say, ad hoc funded over time, but it's a clear output from what our community studies. So we need to ensure that that is more straightforwardly included going forward. So we have these motivating questions that I mentioned at the beginning, but are these enough for what FOGS is currently? Do we need or do we want bolder and stronger motivating questions? Do we want to be measuring ocean properties all across Greenland all the time? Do we want to be measuring surface melt? Do we want to be monitoring certain outlet glaciers all of the time? These are the kinds of questions that, alternatives that could help inform how we move forward as a community. So FOGS 2024 will be another hybrid meeting, but it will be in person at the lovely University of Idaho, which Tim has helpfully developed this chart here that illustrates that it's quite accessible from a number of places. There are 3 airports quite close to Moscow. It is from the photos Tim has sent. It appears to be verdant and beautiful. And this was a great little chart that Tim had included, which is always a good point. If you're studying calving, very occasionally you want to go visit the calving face of a glacier, but you don't want to do a whole conference right in front of it. You want to talk about ice from a safe distance. And the University of Idaho, you may be familiar with the Channel Scablands, is near where those were, where these gigantic outburst glacier floods were, but it is not where they happened. So you'll be removed from these events by distance and about 15,000 years. So with that, we hope to see you at FOGS 2024, and I'd be happy to answer any additional questions. we of course have a website, and we have a mailing list you can subscribe to, and you can reach out to us too. So with that, I will take questions. Thank you. All right, any questions? Requests for clarification? Jack.
Yeah, Joe, I just had a comment.
Sure.
I understand your point near the end. You know, a lot of times groups like this get together and they come up with a very focused statement about, we got to do this, right? And you go to Thorsten and say, we need X million dollars to do this, or combination of Roberto or whatever programs are appropriate in polar programs and Thorsten are going to do so-and-so, right? Or Caitlin. But one thing that I've really liked about FOGS is the real effort and the recognition that progress may require a whole bunch of different communities. And once you start trying to zero in on a big project, you end up risking building those silos even stronger than they used to be. So that's a tension, and I don't know how we deal with it going forward. But
yeah,
just throwing that out there.
100% agree that there is that tension. I think another way to look at it is it depends on your perspective of what has moved the community most forward in either recent years, in the distant past, or what you think will move it in the future. It certainly is the culture of open science and equitable, inclusive efforts all around. But are there also bigger scientific questions that we want to specify here? An example of that would be quantifying the water budget that help us rally around, many groups rally around a particular idea. Or is it individual missions like ISAT-2 that go out and measure one thing everywhere that very much that moves us all forward? And I don't think there's a clean answer to that question. But so I hear you that there's a tension there. Yeah. Anyone else want to chime in on that? Actually, yeah, Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question. Thanks for the nice presentation, and I'm sorry to have missed that most recent FOGS meeting. Do you feel like, does your community feel like the white papers that come out of these meetings lead to more fundable proposals? Or, if you write a proposal to NASA or NSF and say that this was identified by the community or whatever, like, is that something you track, or do you guys have a feel for that?
I think that there are clearly examples of where that has succeeded in the past at the small scale of, say, Green Drill, and perhaps at the larger scale of Operation Icebridge. But I don't have a good answer as to whether or not in the present situation that is still true, and whether there are data to evaluate that historically. Is that a fair answer?
Yeah, I'm not implying that that's the reason to get the community together, but yeah. I was just curious if that's if the white papers that stem from it, which are a lot of work but also incredibly valuable to have, if those you think the community uses to advance proposals.
Yeah, I mean, I think Caitlin had to drop off, but maybe Kelly wants to speak to this as a program manager. I've only ever heard good things about focused white papers from program managers, but maybe
I think it gives,
maybe there's very kind people and don't want to bring us down. Go ahead, Kelly.
I think they do provide, a tangible summary of things that were covered in the workshops that we fund. So that's one thing. I think that is critical, to to see how the money was spent and the summaries from the community that come out of those. So that's, just at that sort of really basic, almost, sorry, it's a little, I don't want to, crunch it down to that comment, but that's part of it. The second part is that these things are publicly available. And then, people in the community can tap on those when they're developing proposals. People have said that this is important in these meetings and, summary statements. And then the third level of, I think, why they're important is it does give the program officers a sense of what is important right now to the community and how that's evolving through time. So I see that really base level, sorry, this is what we spent and how that money was spent and the importance to community can use it to NSF kind of putting its finger on the pulse and having sorry, I'm speaking for NSF and I'm not, I can't speak for NASA, but, putting our finger on the pulse and having a good sense of what the community wants and how it's evolving. So I do think those are, they don't have to be this in-depth summary of all the work that got us here, but some sort of synthesis is a really good thing to do.
Thanks for that question. That was a good question. Anyone else?
There is one question in the chat from Lee, or Leah. Do you see specific barriers, for example, requirements of funding agencies that are preventing better integration of the modeling and observing monitoring communities?
I think in my particular role as a civil servant, I cannot answer this question the way I would like to answer it. So I don't think I'm going to answer. I recognize the value of it, but I specifically should not answer this question. Is that fair? But I think I can maybe answer I can answer it in some terms in that I don't think there are language or requirement barriers that prevent this from that prevent observationalists and modelers from working together.
I can add just a little bit from a program officer perspective. I think what I'm seeing in panel interactions when they're looking at proposals is what doesn't review well is when a proposal doesn't have a modeler on board, and yet their last sentence is these data will be useful for models in the future. Include the modelers up front. Let them tell you what length scales, time scales, everything they need. That review's a lot better than that standard comment in both papers and in proposals of these will be useful for modelers in the future. It just doesn't, it's not reviewing well. People, our budgets are tighter and reviewers and panelists are getting far more savvy and critical of comments like that. That's what I can offer from a program officer perspective.
Can I reply to that a little bit? I totally agree. I think, I used to do a lot of observation heavy proposals and say things like that and, hoping the data would be used by modelers because that's the ultimate, use of the data really. But now I really try to integrate the observations and the modeling and include everything, but it gets very expensive very fast and it blows the budget if you're actually trying to go out and collect new data and do the analysis. And
can I just clarify one thing? Sorry, because I completely agree. I'm not telling you to have a proposal that absolutely has both modeling and observations tied into the same thing. What I'm saying is have a collaborator that's telling you that this is appropriate for the future. Does that make sense? Because you're absolutely right. Things
totally. Because I also, I've come to realize it's very critical to have modelers on board to help determine what kind of observations you really need, instead of just going out and saying we're just going to do everything. What do the models really need? And so yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. That absolutely I think makes total sense, but
I'll just conclude by saying that I've been studying the Greenland ice sheet for over a decade now, and I love poster sessions at small conferences and workshops, because you really get the time to sort of digest what's going on. And I thought that I would miss hearing oral versions of specific projects, more of the updates. But I always come away from FOGS thinking it's a very exciting time to study Greenland. There's a lot going on. It's still changing. It's very concerning, but there's great room to learn a lot and help people out. So anyway, I hope to see you at the next FOGS.
Thanks, Joe. And there's just one kind of follow-up question, and then we can switch to Jason. And that question is, how do you plan to increase the training of personnel to be trained in glacier modeling and also in observational science, or is it more focused on communication between the two, which I think has been answered in part, but maybe not the training aspect?
Yeah. So this is partly addressed by the schools that are out there, but this helps give them a window into what people want to help advance the students and the early career researchers that often join those schools. It's not just about communication between the two. We want it. Genuine training is worthwhile. Sorry. More than one person has told me over the years, gosh, I went to visit this modeler and I played around with the models for a couple of weeks, and I learned that, whoa, I don't want to be a modeler. And sometimes vice versa with fieldwork, and that's perfectly okay. But it's always worthwhile to dip your toes in both realms and get a sense for what the nuances are of that particular subdiscipline, to be able to appreciate that when you're trying to talk to them and learn with them. All right, I'm going to stop there and let. I think I'm the MC now too, aren't I? Oh, right. So Caitlin had to drop off, and even though I am no longer an IRPIC co-lead, I will temporarily put the hat back on and introduce Jason Briner, a professor in geology at the University at Buffalo, and who's going to be talking to us about the Greenland Ice Sheet, is it Stability Workshop? I forget the exact name of the workshop.
More or less.
And so Jason, take it away.
Okay, and I share my screen, is that right? And then.
Yep.
Yes, I think you should have the ability to do that. Okay, great. And we can see that.
Okay, that looks good to everybody. All right. Well, it's nice to see everybody, and it's a great idea to have this meeting focus on these workshops. It's nice to see the results of them get disseminated out more broadly than to those who attended. So I'm going to talk about a workshop that we had last April that took place at the University of Bergen in Western Norway. The title of this workshop was The Greenland Ice Sheet Lessons from the Past. So this was the workshop. Up the upper right is the workshop, sort of a diagram from the workshop website. The workshop website link is there if you want to check it out. The way the workshop came to be is that I was on sabbatical in Bergen last year, living there during the academic year, working with colleagues who studied the Greenland ice sheet on contemporary timescales and on geologic timescales. And we decided that a great thing that we could try to do that year, if we could make it happen, would be to have a workshop to bring the Greenland ice sheet community together, with an emphasis on those who study longer timescales. So we ended up having this workshop. It was in April. The organizing committee is at bottom, and so it was basically, there was some local people at the University of Bergen in Norway, Andreas Born, and I were the main sort of local organizers, along with a couple of postdocs, Robert Law and Therese Reich. There are a couple of folks who were involved in the organizing committee from the GRISO network of Fiamma's project or network to improve understanding of ice-ocean interactions. And in GRISO, there's a paleo community, a paleo subgroup that I'm part of, and Camilla Anderson and Kelly Hogan lead that subgroup. So they were part of this workshop as well. The funding for the workshop was a little bit more piecemeal. It came from the Björknes Center for Climate Research, which is locally there in Bergen. And it came also from a little bit from GRISO in terms of some support for students. Primarily, it came from Andreas Born and my grants that we have ongoing to bring communities together. That's the G-Hub grant that I'm part of, and Andreas's grant called Synergis, which is a Norwegian and European funded project. I should also just step back further in time. Some of you here know that there was a workshop that was very similar to the one we had in April way back in 2017. And that was an ice sheet stability workshop. And that one was an NSF funded workshop, proposal submitted, funded. A group of us had the workshop. We hosted it in Buffalo. And there was about 55 people there over the span of 2 days. We had a white paper that resulted from that workshop, and you can find that online. We did not write and submit a manuscript from that workshop, although we could have. I was too lazy to lead that charge. And there were a number of proposals submitted that stemmed from that workshop and from that white paper. Some were funded, others were not. One of them, I think a major outcome of that workshop was coming to the realization that wasn't new. It's the same realization that the FOGS community has been having, that there's space for platforms to get observationalists and modelers to work more together under the umbrella of open science. So if we can make data more available, maybe we can get modelers using observationalists' data, the results of the observations. And if the observationalists know what modelers need, that they can produce and post these kinds of data sets. And so it was really under the direction of Mark Stieglitz, program manager at NSF Arctic Natural Sciences, that said, hey, sounds to me like you guys might want to consider some kind of Stryber infrastructure proposal to do a project and to build some kind of scientific gateway to advance, to be this sort of like glue that can get these communities working together. And so that resulted in the G-Hub, the gateway cyber infrastructure that's currently in its funding cycle. So this workshop took place quite a few years later. It has a much more international flavor to it, although there were a couple of keynote speakers at the Buffalo one that were from Europe, and some participants were from Europe. This one was much more international. And what we're attempting to do, we haven't really written a white paper yet, but we're currently working on a white paper that we hope to turn into a manuscript submission. Something like looking back at Greenland's future, knowledge gaps, and research priorities. And this is something that Andreas and Kelly are taking the lead on, and I'm in there too. And then a lot of people from the workshop would be participating, including a lot of early career scientists as well. And that is still in the works. We'll see where this goes in the future. It doesn't have the sort of regularity I don't think that FOGS has, although there were a lot of opinions expressed that there should be these kinds of meetings taking place more often, as I'll get to. Raise your hand if you've ever been to Western Norway. And then is anyone, and then actually I can't see the whole audience. And then raise your hand if you were ever there when the sun was shining. These are two very different things. Turns out there's 3 meters of rainfall a year. And for some reason, we just had the most glorious weather this particular week in April. You guys all know, if you've organized a meeting and have people coming to your place or coming to some central location that you've organized, nothing makes you happier than seeing people have a good time and having good weather as part of that. We had 62 participants. You can see the histogram thing or whatever bar graph of where people are from. So of course, the biggest bar is from Norway because it took place there. So a lot of students and faculty that were there decided to just attend the meeting out of convenience. A lot of Americans, Danes, folks from the UK, Germany, and Spain, and then a smattering of others, and Canadians, and so on. So this is a much more internationally flavored community than the first one we had. And it's a reflection of which, funding agencies are funding scientists to work in Greenland and to work on the problem of the Greenland ice sheet. Even though the focus of this workshop was lessons from the past and longer timescales, there's a lot of the scientists who attended are doing contemporary ice sheet change work as well. It was a 3-day workshop, and it was some talks. So it was also posters, and it was a lot of breakout thinking. And the framework of this particular workshop was focused on 3 things, which is sort of just as a way to give the workshop some structure. We broke it into interactions of the ice in the bed, the ice in the ocean, and the ice in the atmosphere. And so these were sort of 3 themes that we probed over the course of these 3 days. Like FOGS, we had breakout discussions. People were writing in Google Slides, and then we were reconvening as the parent overall group and having reports from each of the breakout groups. And basically, it's like, what does this panel of 60 experts think about various things? And so we broke these discussions into gaps in knowledge, things that are stopping our progress, how to fill gaps, how to get things moving forward, and then really how to go forward fast, which is the implementation. How do we implement the ideas that we come up with? Because the weather was so nice, we were able to have our little groups sit outside. It was quite lovely. So day 1 was identifying gaps in knowledge, and there were 6 breakout groups. We divided everybody up into 6 groups, and people were focused on, they sort of self-selected towards ice bed, ice ocean, ice atmosphere. And then we came back. Day 2 charge was how to fill the gaps. Notice the blue sky still. And day 3 still blue sky, and then how to implement. So there were quite a few notes, and what I've done here is just sort of selected some of the main themes to share with you, and then that's basically the end of my presentation. So in terms of knowledge gaps, the ice atmosphere, folks who got together really realized that at least on the longer time scales, it's the climate forcing and the knowledge of paleoclimate was the biggest gap in really paleo ice sheet modeling. So the modelers are like, okay, well, really the biggest uncertainty in our simulations of ice history have to do with the climate forcing more than some of the details of ice flow or calving or things like that. The ice ocean group, maybe that's classic that comes from the ice atmosphere people. The ice ocean group identified calving and frontal ablation as a big uncertainty, but also focused on what processes matter and at which temporal and spatial scales. So I think when people are thinking more about the long term, it's like, okay, well, we know we don't really haven't settled on the best calving law for modeling. But at what time scales does it matter which law you might choose and so on? That's a gap in knowledge. And then from the ice bed folks, they identified gaps in knowledge of the bed properties, also archives from the bed. So what does the geologic record of past ice history on Greenland, how can that be further exploited? And then how does actually the landscape itself of Greenland, how does the geomorphology of the Greenland island evolve along with glacial cycles? That's really a long-term geology kind of question. In terms of filling gaps, the ice atmosphere group wanted to then increase knowledge about paleoclimate, and really we have really good ice cores up at the ice divides and summits, but we have less of that detailed knowledge of past climate history preserved from near the ice margins. So whether that's extracting paleoclimate from more lake and other sediment archives, or maybe trying to target coastal ice caps for ice coring, and then improving data model integration. Ice Ocean was more work using coupled ocean glacier models. So maybe a fjord scale or larger scale, but more coupling it with physical oceanography modeling. And then the ice bed folks, in order to fill gaps, they wanted to increase access to the bed, both directly and by way of drilling and improving drilling technology and the speed by which you can get to the bed quickly to get some measurements in a borehole or get some measurements from the bed, and then also remotely. So just more like on ice geophysics work needs to be done. And then moving on to implementation, and you'll see a theme here in these different groups: data accessibility and availability, central hubs for making data more available and user-friendly. Ice Ocean, something similar: communication between and among communities. Presumably here it's glaciological communities and physical oceanography communities and paleoceanography communities. And then in the ice bed, to implement more access to the bed, people thought that there could be some more infrastructure, maybe buy-in from different funding agencies across nations, infrastructure to support more on-ice work, sort of like the traverse support that Antarctic science has. See that level of traverse support on Greenland for getting vehicles and drills moving across the ice sheet surface. Overall, I just want to finish with one final point. The Greenland community at our workshop really liked the Thwaites Glacier project. And there was a paper that you all probably know, like how fast, Thwaites Glacier, Scambos et al. And that led to an internationally funded focus area. And that's this International Thwaites Glacier project. And it's, all the different types of science that has taken place there in a focused region, including paleoscience on longer timescale stuff, on geophysics modeling. So the idea from our community was if we could rally behind some focus area, for example, the Northeast Greenland ice stream, maybe we could get international buy-in on some focused cross-funded major project, and we could see a lot of the observationalists and the modelers, the oceanographers, the glaciologists, communities all working together in one focus area, and maybe that would be a way to make a lot of progress. So that's the report from our workshop.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. Great workshop. I will open it up to questions. Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. It sounds like a lot of the workshop was really focused on sort of the like past perspectives on specific processes, atmosphere processes, ocean processes, basin processes. Was there also a sort of a kind of a more of a synoptic view of, all right, can we just get the mass changes right? Like, what was the past mass change? If we, my understanding from the ice sheet modeling community is that, for validation purposes of ice sheet models, just knowing what the targets ought to be for hindcasts of model runs is a major unknown. Was there kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think maybe the thoughts that most closely relate to that are having some kind of ISMIP-6 scale intercomparison take place in the paleo. The problem with the kinds of geologic data that we can mine from various archives is that they don't tell us directly necessarily anything about past changes in ice mass without modeling. And sort of our community sort of needs to rely on modeling to get those numbers. So one tricky point is coming up with an observed ice mass change independent of modeling, which isn't really possible. But we thought that doing more model intercomparison work in the past, better integration with the data, testing against relative sea level records, which is the loading of the crust, which relates to mass. Integrating the data into those models would maybe be a way to come up with a more honest representation of what we know about mass history.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking of, I guess, especially of like Camilla Anderson's work from Sermelik Fjord about like, you know, changes in calving fluxes over the last century, you know, like that, all of a sudden now you've got a target. Like, are there other potential tools or places or methods that we could use to at least in local geometries, local geographies, get those targets for modelers?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. I think there's a lot of examples of what the paleo record can provide as a target for somebody to model to see if they can hit that. And then I think the next step is getting those data easily accessible by modelers. So like, you know, here's the package that you can use for your model to, and so there's not a lot of people are working in that space of like, of how to take the observations, repackage it nice and tidy and in the format that a modeler can just grab and go. And that's one of the kinds, that's like the kind of thing we want to try to do with GHub, where we can put on there. So ideally the vision is like the paleo ice sheet modeling community can go there and then pull out these things off the shelf that they can compare their models with.
Cool.
Not there yet.
Great points. I'll question.
Yes, good morning, and thank you very much for the interesting presentation. You mentioned ice-ocean interaction and coupling. Was there a specific area that was highlighted as particularly needing improvement, such as high resolution modeling at the level of the fjords, or more observation of ocean properties, or subglacial discharge quantification, and so on, or all of the above? Was it all of the above? Thank you very much.
Thanks for the question. The answer is yes. I think one issue is that you know, geologists who extract the history of ocean properties from fjord sediment cores, for example, have very few data points across space. And the geometry of fjords is very complicated. And it's really difficult. You know, if you have an ice core and you can reconstruct what temperature it was at some point in the history, there's quite basic ways to extrapolate that across space in the atmosphere. That's not as easy in the ocean. And so one of the tricks is how to take sparse data and make it push that across space. That's one example of where we needed more data model integration in the oceans.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've got a question from Laura Gillard in the chat on ice-ocean coupling, modeling of ice-ocean coupling, and who might be doing that, or do you?
Yeah, good question. I'd probably suggest reaching out to the GRISO network. I think that group of scientists would be the best. They could field your question the best and probably put you in the right direction.
Is it still Fiamma Strenio who's leading that?
Yeah, and I will pop the link to that in the chat there.
Yeah, okay. Laura, does that help? Or if you're still here, I don't think I see your name. Okay, great. Yeah, you know, just going back very briefly to what you and Tim were discussing, I often see this tension between the folks who model the entire ice sheet. You know, they want to compare against an ice sheet wide data set of some kind early or at the periphery. So comparing a full ice sheet model against, say, high resolution results in Sermelik Fjord alone would be tricky. I mean, at least the modelers that I know, they would be keener on comparing against a flow line model, which is, you know, has its own compromises. Yeah, I often see that tension there.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's possible, as you know, a lot of the different modeling groups now have Holocene long simulations. You know, PISM, ISSM, some of the European models. And so maybe if those data become available, then people can use that to nest in a smaller domain and
Yeah,
take
good point.
boundaries from these longer simulations through time.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's been done, but
Everyone, thanks, Joe. Thanks, Jason. I am sorry to inform you all that we have a back-to-back meeting, so I'm going to have to transition us over, and I'm not going to be able to close out this meeting, so you'll have to leave yourself. But there will be a recording of this meeting posted maybe by the end of the day today or next Thursday. Not entirely sure.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone. Very informative. Jason, thank you very much. And great. I guess we'll see you all next time. Be well.
Thanks a bunch.
Okay. Hello.